Hi again, welcome back to the channel. So you've decided that you want to make some extra cash and you're considering something like Amazon Flex. Well, I actually am a self-employed courier, so I'm going to tell you exactly how the provider that I'm with works, and I'm going to give you some figures on based on my experience, and we're going to find out whether or not this is worthwhile for you. Stay tuned. Let's talk about how much you earn per hour doing this. So, for example, I'm on 70p a parcel. It's just a set rate. There's no variability in it, depending like on the size of the box. I know that Amazon Flex, I believe, if you're delivering a packet, it can be a lower rate. If you're delivering a big box, it can be more. Mine's just a set rate, 70p a parcel. Right, so I can deliver round about 20 parcels an hour, so that's £14 an hour. Sometimes, if you get more than one packet for the same address, it works out a better hourly rate because obviously you've got less stops you're doing per hour but more parcels, if you know what I mean. But it depends on the route you've got. Sometimes for things like a route that's maybe only got, like, say, 35, 40 parcels, they're much more spread out. So you would think 30 parcels, that should only take you maybe an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. But it doesn't always work like that. If your addresses are further away from one another and you're having to drive further, the more spaced out they are, sometimes that can be a disadvantage for your hourly rate. You are looking to do, I would say anyway, at least 20 an hour for this to be worthwhile for you. If you can do more than that, or they're really, really close together, or you've got several addresses really close together that have got more than one packet, that rarely ever happens for me. I mostly have one address, one parcel. There was a day when I had more than five parcels for the one address, but like I say, I haven't had that in, I think there was one time, maybe 2 years ago, that I got five for the one address, but it really doesn't happen very often. So, depending what rate you're on, you're really going to want to try and rattle through them as quickly as you can. It won't always be possible to keep up that pace because if we maybe go to a block of flats or something, there's no way you can keep that up if you get maybe say two, three blocks of flats in a row, which I've had in the past. So it's not really blocks, but they're maybe like two, three stories. Like, but secure entry by the time you're waiting to get buzzed in, by the time you climb the stairs, if there's no lift, whatnot, that kind of thing does slow you down, and that'll affect how many you can do per hour. So that's also when you're loading your parcels at the start before you even get into the car to do your run. So you're loading the car. You don't get paid to load your car. So if you turn up at the depot and it takes you half an hour or something to load your car, I'm a bit quicker than that now, especially because I can group the parcels as to certain sort of sub areas, certain housing estates. I know where they all are because I do the same area. If you say do Flex, Amazon Flex, you turn up and it's a random place, you're not sure about the area, you just don't know the best way to group the parcels, then you might take longer to load up as well, which you don't get paid for. But you need to factor that in, the cost of your time basically. So if it's taking you half an hour, maybe more, because you don't know the area to load up your parcels or whatever, you need to take into account that you're not paid for that. That's just something to think about too. Right, since we're talking about money, how much fuel does it actually cost to do these deliveries? Right, so I've made some notes on a bit of paper. From experience, I know that my car gets about 6.5 miles per litre of diesel. It's a diesel car, it's a 1.6. It's a Ford C-Max. It's quite heavy anyway. So I had a Peugeot 206 before this, which is also a 1.6 litre diesel. It was obviously much lighter, smaller car, easier to move, less rolling resistance. So it got slightly better fuel economy. Maybe not much, but it definitely was a bit better, I felt. But anyway, let's crunch some numbers here. So 6.5 miles per litre. And if we say that an average run is maybe 16 miles worth, depending on how many parcels you get. It could be less than that, might be a wee bit more than that. See about 16 miles on average. So that then gives you 2.66 litres of fuel that you're going to use for the 16-mile round that you're doing. And if we take an average diesel price of 1.55 pounds, so £1.55 per litre of diesel, then if you round things up, it gives you approximately £4.15 of fuel used just for doing those 16 miles. And I think that is fairly accurate, because especially when you go to an address and you're stopping your car and then you're starting your car again very quickly, let's say after 1 or 2 minutes after being to the door, delivering the parcel, you really do not get brilliant mileage doing these deliveries. So that's the example of my car. So that's definitely something that you need to take into account. Let's say my car's a diesel, so when it's idling, at least it doesn't use as much fuel as the equivalent petrol engine. Petrol engines use a bit more fuel when they're idling. So assuming that you don't stop the car when you get to an address or whatever and you're making a delivery, diesel should be slightly more efficient in idle. But even at that, like I say, I've worked it out, it really is terrible. And I mean, this car on the motorway gets round about maybe 45, 50 miles per gallon tops, depending on how fast you're driving. If you're doing this sort of thing in a petrol engine car, you might find you're using more fuel doing the deliveries anyway. You've also got to take into account, so if you're travelling to the depot, depending on how far that is from your house, and if you're doing something like Amazon Flex and they send you like miles away to a random run that's away from the depot, you have to take that into account as well. Is it worth it for you? Are you actually going to be making much money at the end of it? That's just a consideration that you need to sort of take into account. A quick word about insurance, or courier insurance specifically. If you're going to do something like Amazon Flex on the short term, maybe the weekend or something like that, or if you decide to make some money doing fast food takeaway deliveries, which I did do in the past, which is it's okay actually, you get tips in that as well, which you don't get with something like Amazon Flex or being like a self-employed courier. So the fast food takeaways is something that you can consider as well for making yourself some extra cash. I might do a video on my experience doing that, but for the moment I'll just concentrate on the courier insurance. You absolutely must have hire and reward insurance in place on your policy. I don't know if your provider that you're with will provide that. You need to ask them. Most insurance providers that I've came across do not cover for that use case, so you need to go to a specialist provider. There are some providers online that will insure you by the hour if you're doing things like fast food takeaways or delivering parcels. So make sure you do your research and go with a reputable provider. Also make sure that your main policy that you have in place accepts any top up that you might get. Again, I know there are some providers that I spoke to in the past that didn't accept the top-up cover, even though they weren't insuring the car for the time the parcels were in the car anyway. It wasn't anything to do with them, but I'm with a provider now that does do that. Just make sure that you've got the cover in place, that it's cost effective as well. I'm paying something like £6 a week as a top-up policy through Yodel itself, and my provider that I'm with, my main policy, they do accept it, so it works out fine for me. Just make sure that you're not paying over the odds through one of these providers that you get on the internet. Make sure it's accepted by your main policy, and just make sure that you absolutely have higher and reward insurance. You don't want to get stopped by the police. You don't want a court appearance, a fine, points on your licence, because that'll affect your insurance going forward anyway. You just don't want to take the risk. So just make sure that you're all legal if you choose to do this. Now, since we're wanting to make a profit out of this and we're not wanting to lose out too much, you need to consider the wear and tear on your car if you're doing this semi-regularly. So things like suspension, your tyres, your starter motor, that's a big one. So if you're doing these deliveries, you're going to say 60, 65, 70 different independent addresses. So you stop in your car every time and you're starting it again. So you're using the starter motor 60 odd times. Now, depending on how often you're doing this, obviously that is a lot of wear and tear on your starter motor. It's really not designed to be used in that way. And from experience, I can tell you, with my previous car that I had, which was a Peugeot 206, when I was doing this, before I got this one, I actually did end up having to replace the starter motor because I went out one afternoon after having picked my son up from school. I still had some parcels to do, and I went out and I turned the key and literally nothing happened. So there wasn't even that clicking noise you get when your battery goes flat. Nothing happened whatsoever. There was like no power getting to the car at all. So it turned out I had popped my starter motor. So that was an expensive bill for me. It was over £400 to get that starter motor replaced. That was a real sting. So things like if you're doing it, the deliveries for Amazon Flex, and you're maybe only doing the occasional weekend or whatever, I wouldn't imagine that would be too much of an issue for you. But you've got to take into account as well that if you're going to, say, housing estates that are full of speed bumps, that's another one that will wreck your car in short order. You get your suspension will just be shot as well. So there's a housing estate that's up the road from me. I do 6 days, so I'm always up at that housing estate. It's about a mile and a half away. Every other street you go to in it has got several speed bumps along it. You can't really do any more than about 15 miles an hour. If you do any more than that, you couldn't even do 20, or the bump you get when you go over these is severe. And they're concrete bumps as well. And this housing estate's been there since 2008, I believe. And it's the proper concrete speed bumps, and they're all worn, and they're like sharp edges and all that on them. And you go over them at any speed, you're going to pop a tyre. The bumps, you're going to wreck your springs, your suspension. So that is something that you need to think about as well. If you're going to housing estates like that, and you really like it slows you down, it really does. But you like to say either that or you're going to destroy your car. But again, that's something that you need to think about if you're considering going down this route to try and make a bit of extra cash. Just one last thing about wear and tear. While we're on the subject, you need to consider the cost of the maintenance. My advice to you would be, if you can afford it and something starts to go wrong with your car, get it fixed at the time. Don't wait until the car's due an MOT, because then you build up more and more problems, and when you're trying to get things repaired, so you might have your brakes might start to go, your suspension might have gone, your starter motor might be on its last legs, and all these things would make for a very, very hefty bill if you don't sort them at the time. Going to talk about the app that I use now. The Yodel app was introduced a couple of years ago. Before they had the app, it was like a standard scanner where your manifest would come through, the addresses and whatnot, but you couldn't change the order of what came through, which was a real pain in the neck. So when you were planning your route, what I had to do at the start was, before I knew the area properly, I had to write down the addresses in the order that I wanted to do them on a bit of paper, which really wasn't brilliant because you had to take the time to actually write down the addresses in order on a bit of paper, because you couldn't move the order on the app screen. It was just a basic terminal like you get in a supermarket type thing. But that's irrelevant now because we've moved on to the app. So I use my phone now for the app, and you can actually move the addresses into the exact order that you want to do them before you set off. They also have an optimization feature on the app. Unfortunately, I can't show you the app. I'm sitting in the car just now and it's boring anyway, but you get the gist. With the optimization feature, if you were, say, different areas and you didn't really know them, you could use that, the optimization feature, to order the addresses into what it thinks is the best way to do them. A word of caution though, I had tried that with this area, even though I know it. Obviously I didn't use it, but I tried it to see how good it was. And for the most part, it was okay. It would group similar addresses together. But there's a house in the state about a mile and a half away from me up the road, which is like one of my busier places that I go to, and the optimization feature would group most of those addresses together, but occasionally you would get one address that's up in that estate and it would appear with the addresses which are like 2 minutes round the corner from my house, which would be a disaster if you were to do that if you didn't know the area. If it was grouping, like if that's how that worked out and you didn't know any better, so you might go round the corner and you might start doing those ones, then it's going to take you up a mile and a half away. You're going to do like, say, 6, 7 addresses there, and then it's not what it's not going to work out for you time wise and money wise, because it's not grouped them all together because of whatever way the postcodes work. It's grouped the addresses, or maybe a few addresses that are in that estate up the road 1.5 miles away, and it's tagged them onto the ones that are 2 minutes round the corner that you're going to do, and you can see that that's going to make for a very, very messy route. So that's something to look out for as well. The optimization feature on these apps isn't brilliant, so try and work out the area, get a feel for the area, use the maps or whatever, the Google Maps. Try and find out where the addresses are if you're not sure, and just make sure that you're not getting sent up to 1.5 miles away when you've already, like, it's been tagged onto one that's like, just like I say, 2 minutes from your house. It really doesn't, like, that'll really mess up your route big time. So something to be aware of there. Okay, to wrap this up then, in conclusion, is it worthwhile for you? Will you make a bit of extra cash out of it? If you're doing something like Amazon Flex, possibly, but you've got to work out how far away are they sending you. Are you going to a depot that's maybe miles away from your house? Then you're having to spend half an hour, whatever it is, loading up your car chock full of stuff. Are they sending you to somewhere where it's an area you're not really familiar with? Because if that's the case, that's going to take you longer, which means obviously you're going to take longer to do the route. Your hourly rate won't really work out brilliant depending on how many parcels they give you and what the rate per parcel is. I'm not sure about Flex, to be honest, but that's something to think about. Now, obviously, if you're like me and you're doing it 6 days a week, it's a bit different to doing something like Flex, but like talking about getting a bit extra cash here. So just make sure that if you're going to do Flex, don't be sent miles away and whatnot, and because again your fuel costs and whatnot, and as I mentioned previously with my example, when you're doing the actual delivery phase of the driving, that is it's like the worst driving that you can do. The constant start stopping outside the houses. You're only going maybe half a mile from one house to the other, maybe even a mile, whatever. You're stopping your car, you're getting out, you're handing something to somebody, starting your car again, the wear and tear, whatnot. For something like if you were doing it for, if you're a student or something, you want to pick up a bit of extra cash, you're maybe doing it the occasional weekend, it might actually work out okay for you. But I would think long term, doing something like flex every weekend or whatever, I don't think it would be worthwhile for you. But again, it's something that you need to weigh up whether or not you're getting good routes that are maybe close to the area that you live in. I'm pretty lucky here because I don't change routes. I deliver within 3 miles of my own house. So obviously, as I mentioned before, due to my circumstances, which I won't go into, but it works for me just now. But you've just got to sort of take into account your running costs of your car, the wear and tear, whatnot. Can you get a garage to do the repairs for cheap if your suspension and things do go? You're going through tyres pretty quickly doing this. But there you are. That's just a kind of overview of what it's like for me anyway, from my experience. Thanks for watching.